Greetings from Hyderabad. Today's event focuses on stopping AI hallucination and session and winning relevance in enterprise Sitecore, presented by Yogi Reddy, hosted by Vishal and Yamini. Over to you, Yogi.
Hey, thank you, Amni. Thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to thank Yamini and Vishal for providing me this opportunity. And thank you, everyone, for joining and giving your time today. Yes. So, as Amni mentioned, right, I'm going to talk a little more about AI hallucination. And this is an inspired topic from the SUGHYD recent India. So, I'll share the credits at the end. But what I have built upon is like, at an enterprise level, how we can do it, right? Primarily focused on checklist, etc. So today I'll be walking you through primarily on, what this AI hallucination is, like, how does it affect in the era of Sitecore AI and how we can go around about it. Thank you. Taking that into cue, let me introduce myself. My full name is Yogendra Reddy, but I go by shortly Yogi because I lived quite a time abroad since last 10 years out of at least 9.5 years is abroad. And my name was difficult to pronounce. So always introduce myself as Yogi as in Yogi Bear, which is far more easier for our colleagues from West to, get into. So coming to my things, I'm acting CEO and of Devera Consulting, my own company, which I have started after returning to India last year. And coming to my Sitecore connection, I've been Sitecore consultant, developer, and varied roles from the last 14 years. And I have a feeling I might have worked with few of you from a client side as well. So yeah, and it's good to see you all. And coming to this topic, so although this is more like, for me in the series, I also had presented a predecessor in November, which you can see it in the link, which I've done it for SUG MEME and SUG Kerala, where I have talked more about Sitecore AI and enterprise value proposition. So you could think this is more the presentation that I'm going to talk is primarily as a successor to my previous talk, but more from enterprise sense. So I would be navigating in between, between technical, the business strategy, etc., as well. So during this, please excuse me. I try to stay relevant as much as possible, but if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me in between. And in case if you want to talk more about me, you can always connect with me at connect@deveraconsulting.com, and I'm happy to facilitate any sort of discussion or anything that you want to catch up. And taking that into agenda, right? So I'm going to talk about a shorter agenda, but I'm going to focus more on 6 topics. So this is more around, I'll separate primarily, from a hallucination, there are a lot of failures, which Sitecore AI can do it, right? And, or, basically it could undermine different actions, which may not be relevant to the enterprise, although we built it. So this topic talks about how AI has changed shape with DXP to XM Cloud and from XM Cloud to Sitecore AI, and what are the possible chances of failure, where are the failures, and how we can have a defense layer, and how we could minimize the blast radius, the impact radius we call, along with the checklist. So I've been talking about Sitecore has a change shape, right? As you know, as you're aware, Sitecore was announced in November 2025 last year at the Sitecore Symposium, where everyone thought it was more like an XM Cloud rebranding, but actually it's a fundamental tech stack realignment behind it. So it is still built on XM Cloud Foundation, means it is still built on SaaS framework. But earlier, when it used to stay as XM Cloud, each product had its own natural knowledge graph or natural graph. But now they connected everything. They have a shared knowledge graph. That's the key fundamental. Means if your knowledge graph isn't sustainable or is faulty, any actions on it can have an effect on it. So That's where, the whole point in this room is where Sitecore AI is called the foundation, but actually it is the knowledge graph. The knowledge graph is interpreted multiple ways through metadata, through the interactions, through the data that is captured, and interaction data on the website. So through all of this, with all that as a foundation, if the agents interpret any wrong fact, there are always chances that it would cascade from one entity earlier, like the CMS or DAM, into multiple stuff as well. So any questions here? Right. Thank you. So basically, like if your knowledge graph isn't sustainable, or isn't valid enough, so there's always a foundation level risks. And what I mean with that foundation levels risk, right? So it could be an hallucination. So how many of you have been interacting or interacted with the AI tools like OpenAI or Claude or Gemini in that sense? Can I just get a quick vote in the room? You could do it by raising hand. Yeah, I see one. The rest are shy ones, I believe. Two. Oh, the count is increasing. Yeah. I know Manu. Manu did a whole talk, like he created his own virtual avatar there from Sitecore Symposium, I understand. But the point, what I mean by hallucination is, let's say think of it more like a human. So as a human, we have a fundamental problem that, hey, we just relate, or, we provide our thinking, or we provide a goal or a result based on how we are fed with the information. Let's say if there is a gap in information, even humans has the fundamental problem of hallucination, or taking a wrong action, basically, in this regard, from a system perspective. So think that is, it's more like a human problem, but we kind of reduce that by asking a lot of critical questions, trusting the people. So basically this point is about, like, how would you do the similar human level trusting exercise, transfer that in the era of Sitecore AI. So that's how it is talking about. So if there is a mismatch in the fact that it is the information that it is being fed, or we are being humans are being fed, there is always an irrelevance problem. Your solution may not be relevant. So I think those are the two failures that we are talking about. And I have an example for you here. As you can see, uh, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, the standard case where in Air Canada was one of the early adopters of AI, where they have plugged into OpenAI models and etc. So they were running their entire chat assistant based on that. And a person couldn't attend due to a real-time failure, and there was a clause in, basically the chat assistant without the empathy has said, right, hey, the podcast said, like, so hey, you can claim a bereavement leave without us. So basically the point is, there are empathy, there are grounding rules, right? As a human, you interact with empathy, you understand each other person, but it won't be the same with bot. So here I have one wrong answer from Air Canada chatbot, which is trained, has a legal liability, and they had to pay $2 million in damages for that. So at this moment, I would like to pause and just want to pulse check if there are any questions on this slide or the topic. So far. And since we are talking about hallucination, let's look at how models also perform. So how our models perform. So as you can see in the screen, on your left are the models. These are also called as frontiers. Frontier model, as in, like, what are the top popular models that's being used across. So this may be a few, since in the best interest of time, and then fitting, I may have not chosen other models like Grok, etc. But this is more the data. So basically, for hallucination, there is a heuristic that's called, Hughes hallucination evaluation model classifier. So basically, this is nothing but a benchmark which says, whenever you ask a model, there are chances that it would still miss the right answer, although having in its knowledge graph for 5% of time. So the lower this value is, higher, lesser the hallucination. So basically you can see ChatGPT 5.4 mini is scoring at 5.5, which is like, which is very close to the benchmark, but rest are scoring low. For example, I think most of the developers, for cost reasons, I see a lot of adoption in terms of enterprises on cloud sonnet, so it's set fair. So there are chances that, at least, there are many chances that from the data set that these models are evolving, so when you ask it to summarize, there are chances that, it deviates at least 10.6% of the failure. And also, like, this is also goes back to, how these models need to be engineered, right? So these models might be engineered, tuned to a lot of parameters and the RAG frontiers, and then the classifiers, etc., etc. But it also provides that, let's say, if we have to evaluate, like, by looking at this task, some of you might not, have a caveat that, thinking, hey, has this model provided me the right answer? Or, basically we call it reasoning tax in SitecoreAI. So basically, the higher the hallucination value, or, HHEM index, the higher the reasoning tax be. That means you have lower trust on the system. And for your information, so this is derived from, from the data set, like, where precision is quite needed, like law, medicine, and finance, or, you could call it more regulated industries. So this benchmark is against the most regulated industries. So if you have clients in banking, if you have clients in pharma or healthcare, this is where you can do it. So this is more from general, trending analysis, etc. But let's look at, how it can affect on SitecoreAI. So for example, in SitecoreAI, as we know, like, we have CMS, DAM, everything, etc. But here I will talk more about, how this hallucination cascade between CMS, search, Agentic Studio, and, Personalize. For example, let's say the base knowledge graph, or the data, or the foundation, uh, had, an SKU. If you're looking at an e-commerce site, if you have an SKU, an unit e-commerce item that needs to be sold on the website, is not correct, and but you have made an agent to create a draft PDP page for it, so it never had. So once you never had, but, you go ahead in your workflow, you go ahead and then, you publish this page, so it goes in search. And in search, right, if you don't have a relevance, especially the local bleed, a French visitor might serve a German content for the same SKU. And similarly goes with, like, if this SKU is used by different segment, and in Personalize, if a wrong segment, by based on analysis from knowledge graph, resolves confidently and gets, offered or served in it, then there is a big problem. And last but not least, like, as you know, these agents, they don't suggest, they kind of act on our instructions. So basically, if the agent which is acting, and if that act has cascades across multiple other items inside Sitecore AI, it ties back to, the blast radius, we call, like, the number of places where it can blast, and, cascade, or, have a butterfly effect of this problem. Coming on to the next things, right? So the next one is about, like, hey, we talked about the problem, we talked about what hallucination is, we spoke about, like, what are the industry benchmarks, we spoke about, like, how it can impact Sitecore AI. So last could be, like, what sort of defense do we need it, right? So as you know, we are very good at acronyms. I also synthesize that into GCRVG. So the first G in GCRVG stands for grounding. So grounding is nothing but basically the data enrichment that you could do when the sources, comes into Sitecore AI. For example, I'll talk more detail in the next slide. So, but for now, you can think about like, grounding. Grounding is the factor of, where you start, the foundational factor of, where you can start, like, make your knowledge graph precise. It gets all the right attributes, metadata attributes that it requires. It is fed with, the correct information, which is scrutinized, etc. The next one is constraint. So this knowledge graph, as I said, right, it's across multiple roles. Constraint is where you can think about the roles and RBAC policy of this knowledge graph hallucination. And the next one is rank. So once you have these guardrails for the agents, and then what are the allowed actions that you can take it from constraint. The next one is rank, alpha ranks, where you can talk about like, hey, this agent, the enriching agent is 85% accurate or 90% accurate. And the next one is verify. So as I said, right, we do this ranking automatically. We can come up with an algorithm, and that algorithm is based on the language, audience, segment, etc., etc. But the verification of it, like the final verification of it, can be done with a human in the loop. All the ranks that are coming out of this may not be tuned, right? As you know, algorithm requires tuning, so this is a continuous exercise. Similarly, constraining is also a continuous exercise with new data, new challenges, etc., coming into play. Basically, when with lot of code that gets a shift, you always need to govern. And last, nothing but is governs, where you talk about audit trail. This is where your complaints comes from. So this last facet, or the fifth layer of defense, talks more about the C. That's nothing but the compliance side of it. Okay, how would you govern these roles, and how would you have this data retrieval or data processing? Let's say if your client is following EU data residency rules, etc., etc. And for example, let's talk about the first layer before. So we're talking about knowledge graph and how would you do enrichment. As I said, right, the knowledge graph is built. This is kind of shared across all the entire modules of inside the SitecoreAI. But usually, how it works at enterprise, you always connect to MCP primarily, so that these are just not APIs, but they're more like context APIs. So let's say, for example, you're looking at an e-commerce website, and when you have an e-commerce website, you always have different agencies of record, or different places where you store database. Let's say the PIM, or the product information data is stored in ERP, or in its own PIM system. So the facts that are arriving from SKU truth, or let's say the PIM systems, has higher degree of precedence in our governance algorithm rather than coming from other sources. So similarly, the product and policy docs, primarily, which are required to authoritative. So the PIM, the product usage, like the user manuals, or let's say if you're looking at an e-commerce website for healthcare supplies, you need information, or the PDFs that are related to how to use, or to which the medicine can be administered to. So you cannot have the same medicine for people who are less than 5 years, who are till 18 years, and adults, etc. So in adults too, different age groups has it, the different segmentation has. But and similarly, like CRM is the entitlement, where you can see, hey, which people has access to, or let's say if you have a closed dashboard, so what features that an user from different geographies can act to. Let's say if there is a challenge here, right? As it told that the knowledge graph primarily is enriched by the data that it gets from these sources, from the sorry, I'm sorry. So from the sources of PIM, policy docs, etc. So basically what I'm trying to say, the point is, my take is, your knowledge graph is as good as data that is enriched here. So primarily, if you're looking at agents to enrich, so if you want to build a knowledge graph, if you want to control what Sitecore builds knowledge graph out of, you can always build, you can always control the data it gets fed into. And based on this data, you can always create an algorithm where you can enrich. So basically, the enrichment at this level can help you with the prompts, understanding, etc., etc. Let's say if you go back to the example of previously about the bereavement prompt. So basically, if there should be, if there is a policy of bereavement, then Air Canada's answer wouldn't have already existed, or like, if the chatbot or the agent is derived from here. So then you don't need. For example, on your right are some of the examples where you can talk about like any information that's coming from PIM about product is a fact, and everything else references to it. And if you have certain fields which are empty, then you abstain it, in the retrieval process. So taking that onto, the first is enrichment. So the more you enrich, more intelligence you give it a knowledge graph, and same, then it cascades down. So this process, entire process is called grounding. And for example, next one is the constraint. So if you look at it, constraint, the agent is, I know now you have limited number of agents in the Sitecore AI, but with more agents being developed, agents are nothing but, in olden days or in e-commerce days, we used to call it minions or process. Processes which are tied to a certain scope of work. So similarly here you constrain agent, basically you need to have guardrails on what data can be used by agent, and like, basically you refine the agent logic in such a way that it does small well-defined set of things. For example, if it's getting product data for them, so you only focus on product data or enriching that data which is being already come from the guardrails of previously. So, and also you manage like, what is allowed, what is not allowed, so that basically you minimize the damage in the beginning and start from there. So once you have this process of constraining, and then you have a grounded enrichment, you focus on, ranking. So basically this is where your RAG systems come into play, and this is where your RAG agents would come into play to retrieve the information. And once you have retrieve the information, you can have different filters, like you can filter the data by site, language, audience, freshness is nothing but the last updated, etc. And once you have these 5 filters, you can also boost up bury, which can be used as a search. And similarly, the agents out of the box, Sitecore has this feature called as precision K, where this is nothing but you could talk, this is more like tuning aspects of. So, and this is with all the combination of filters, and then the boost of recent relevant data, you can get precision case. So this is also a measure that can be published. So coming on to the next 2 layers, basically these are the 3 layers primarily for the business, etc. Let's say in the company at a division level, they could be stakeholders. So up to layer 3 is where most of the developers would play into, like to help in terms of. So layer 4 and 5 is where the governance or the business aspects of approval would come into play. So level 4, layer 4, we are talking about like hey, we can check whether the verification, let's say it may not be possible for all the things, but you can initially, you can have someone to verify the human in the loop, and then the level of verification or the number of items to verify would reduce over a period of time, because with the RAG, and then with we defined doing it multiple types or iteration process of the first layer 1 to 3, system gets adjusted and becomes self-aware, and by which your verification process reduces. But initially, yes, there could be a challenge more about like hey, for any PIM product, right, they could be a subject matter expert from business side on what attributes that they want, and some of them can check it. For example, in case of medicines, so they can play around with the chatbot or whatever the agent information that you get, right, and they can actually verify, hey, for this search, or has I got the right retrieval, do I need to rank up or down, or etc., and they can actually review. So this is where, if you go back, like layer 4 is the point where you can mostly iterate layer 1, 2, and 3. So with the feedback from layer 4, layer 1, 2, and 3 becomes the closed loop in your development lifecycle. And last but not least, once you have a verified data, the next is about governance, where you talk about, you govern the foundation, you govern the permissions, audit trail, the EU residency of the European sites. Especially, it becomes relevant if you have a website, a global website, which is multi-region, and that's where you're repeating evaluation. Basically, this is where you govern. You may have a team of architects as along with the business representation, a periodic governance to check, hey, how is the Sitecore AI evolving, or how is the tasks that are evolving, and have we minimized the hallucination scores from last time. So from this, I want to take a pause and then check uh, with the team if there are any questions so far. Take that as a no. And coming to, we've also been talking about the blast radius. So basically, as I said, right, Sitecore AI, think of it more like with more agentic AI that are coming, Agentic AI Studio, and also with Scrunch, AU, and Geo that are coming into. Imagine a single fact or in a single meta description gap on the product information on any e-commerce website could lead to multiple things, because it's the same data or the same knowledge graph that is used by your chat assistants, personalization, AI answerages, and all generated content. So any error there wouldn't do. So that's the reason why these layers of defense are quite important. And with these layers of defense, this is more at a high level data, but I'm going to talk to you a little more about how do we handle the enterprise readiness checklist. So perhaps this is more like a, I'm talking this more like checklist, but also it's more like a guiding framework for you. And if you have multiple layers, you can always expand on this. But yeah, this is where at least this provides you, the foundational 6 concrete checks which you can fill. If you can tick all of these 6, then you would have minimized, or you have removed a lot of hallucination and relevance problems per two. The first one, so I think this is what we have spoke about earlier, like making, enriching the groundedness, especially the knowledge graph via MCP. And if you have identified different systems which has one, so which is the single source of truth. So I've also seen cases where domain object, let's say product domain object, is sourced in multiple systems. Then you may need an intermediate layer which will combine everything and but sends only the right information to MCP and knowledge graphs. And similarly, the retrieval agent, we talk about the answers site. So this is more like repeating previously, the governance, and this is against each topic. And since we are putting a lot of governance, right, but we should also talk about the evidence. Basically, how would you measure groundness rate? Is like percentage of traceable answers to the source system. As you know, I think you might have seen, especially when you're searching in now Google or Gemini or anything, you always see citations. So that's where the more the citations are for the same information, that's where you can see groundedness rate. Similarly, when you're talking about enterprise AI, how many citations does it go back to the source of truth? For example, SKU, if you're talking about an item that is already there, the SKU is how many citations or how much meta information is available in PIN. So is the information that is retrieved as the same? And similarly with the retrieval. So are the right items retrieved? And basically this is where your context comes into play. This is where knowledge graph inference and interpretation comes into play. And similarly, hallucination rate. So whenever you have human in the loop in the verification process, you can check, hey, when we first landed on this site, how many errors are there, and how much hallucination, how much is it deviating, and what's the next iteration, like are we improving by iteration or not? And similarly the accuracy, containment, like hey, is the information that is, or the fact that is wrong, has it contained in only PIM or one system, or has it moved across? So that's where your guardrails comes into play, especially the constraint side of it, and time to correct. So what is the time to correct? This is more like, TAT or turnaround time we call. So this is what it is. So basically, whatever the human trust that we are doing, that we are transferring it into the machine in this regard. So this is primarily, the primary metrics where you can start with, what AI hallucination is, how would we govern this, what are the 5 layers of defense, and the enterprise readiness checklist, etc. So you could always elaborate mostly on these metrics because these are nothing but the KPIs. But usually in my previous scenarios, or where I have consulted for clients or set up teams to think about AI, so we put these metrics in front of a steering committee, and that steering committee defines the threshold, because this threshold is not universal. So this threshold is per industry. So generally the threshold ranges from a hallucination rate of like 5 to 10% initially, but the aim is always to reduce it to 4 or 3 or 10%. So, and that also ends my uh, topic, and then ends my presentation. So I'm happy to take your questions, challenges, or if there is any stories that you would like to discuss.
Yeah, you can raise your hand and ask a question. Also, you can put in the chat box so um, good speaker can answer the queries. Okay. Like I have a question. Like,
Yes,
if we
Emily.
are trying to reduce the hallucination, right? We are also using more models, and we are making a lot of stuff with the models and combining more models and more tools also, like LLM tools and other things.
Yeah.
So how can we reduce the hallucination? Like, I understand the things which you have said, but a simple way to like, because governance is very much important nowadays, because we cannot make laws for all the clients or anybody who is not adhering to the governance of AI.
Yeah. Although, yeah, let me go back to this slide, right? Let me erase. Sorry. So let me go back to this slide. So we are talking about, MCP here, right? MCP is where it comes into play. So MCP is nothing but, your connector. Basically, this is your orchestrator, right? I talked about
Yes.
here, it's mostly source of systems, but the source of systems could also be models. So earlier, if you remember, in a composed or decomposed model, the intermediate API orchestrator, or you may need a API layer, right, which orchestrates between CD server or any other systems. Similarly, you'll also need a model orchestrator. That's what it is coming. So basically, you need a layer in between, and this could be one MCP or it could be multiple MCPs here. And these MCPs, go with multiple versions and then they get tuned for a
Okay.
period
So,
of
but
time. So
yes, every client would not be able to create their own MCP, right? So it is up to the partners or like to make, because every enterprise
mhm,
company or a client might have their own paid model or paid security model for
yeah,
access. But still, there are hallucinations that would happen. So, what would you suggest for this MCP? Because who's not able to create an MCP model for their
yeah.
own client or other purpose?
So there are two things, right? So it depends on the model that you choose. For example, Llama is a open source model which my clients has used, and
Okay.
which is Facebook driven, right? Meta driven. So it has all the natural language and contextual data, but it needs to be fed with a lot of information. It needs to be trained more than
Yes.
compared to OpenAI, or look at other models, right? But they invested on training, right? But they trained that model because they started this project at least 14 or 15 months earlier than the timeline, where they spent at least 7 to 8 months on just a training and making sure it's accurate. So how they trained it is by creating their own orchestrator. So basically, MCP is nothing but, or knowledge graph is nothing but a vector database. So
Yes.
uh,
Correct.
so earlier, what we are talking about is, like in database, right? At the moment, you had fields which is 2D in nature, but when you have a vector database, like 3D or 4D or
Matrix.
5D. It mostly matrix, like
Matrix type. Yes.
where you can add lot of classification parameters, and you rate the model based on the number of parameters, right? For example, OpenAI boasts about we have 3 billion parameters, which we
Correct.
understand from the data set. Similarly, so the hallucination also primarily because we don't OpenAI doesn't say which data sets it is parsing, but at least internally when
Okay.
you're parsing a model, you have control on what data sets you're exposing to the model, right?
Okay.
So in
But
the use case,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry.
So let's say in the use case of general HR thing, right? And the HR wants to talk about internal policies, but also they want to talk about an external information, like hey, let's say what is the governance law? They want to index all the labor ministry documents inside it, and they want to grind their own policy. Let's think about that HR use case where you're defining this MCP or the knowledge graph, or let's say you need to build a HR website, proper Sitecore, right?
Mm,
So at that
mm.
point, let's say if you publish a document, or if the government source has any challenges, then it cascades down, right? So that's when the information that is coming from there, which are policy documents, right, they're authoritative in nature, right? So you give them a lot of precedence. And this MCP model, MCP is more like intermediate orchestrator, but basically you're adding another refinement layer. You could also have an API, or another layer which can create context APIs by the information that is assimilated from policy docs. So now we are talking about general APIs, right? But in future it will be APIs versus contextual APIs. So contextual APIs are nothing but they understand your semantic analysis, or depending on time of retrieval, it becomes self-aware over time with the knowledge graph.
Okay.
So that's
Okay.
where you're adding, basically this MCP is nothing but an intermediate layer which converts normal API calls into contextual API calls, depending on the connector that you use.
Okay. So we need not develop any our own MCP is not needed. We can use existing ones also, right? But if
Existing
it's for
ones also.
HR, yeah, HR portal or any specific thing, we may build this MCP also like from the scratch, like using
That's right.
Llama or other tools. Yeah.
Yeah, you can always build that. So Llama helps you build that natural language graph and interpret. So
Mm.
basically, in any AI model, it has an inbuilt parameters of semantic analysis, like emotions, right? In
Sentence
what emotions?
transformers.
Yeah, transformers. So basically, going forward, right, most of the roles would be mostly around, who understands this model, who understands this parameters, tuning it, and then having this governance in place and acting against these constraints.
Okay, okay, got it.
Uh,
I think this is very advanced topic, and I'm really I mean like I'm really learning a lot from this session. So,
Thank you.
anybody have any other queries?
No. Yes. Yeah, I might be a little bit, one step advanced than the current one, but this topic is primarily to enlighten you on, what challenges are that are going to come. And yeah, so I think as a team or as a Sitecore group, we are not far ahead. But these are some of the critical questions that I receive whenever I make an RFPs or RFIs for clients. So
Mhm.
whatever that I've gone through, I just want to share with you, and then make sure this framework also gets established. And there's one more credit that is due. So I also want to thank. So this session is an inspiration from Sakshi Kurana and Anurag. So Sakshi is from Deloitte, Anurag is from uh, Johnson Controls. So Johnson Controls is similarly enabling this, which Sakshi Kurana was enabling, but they were like primitive in the start. But I used this topic. I got inspired from this topic, and then advanced my understanding, and dug deeper into it. And thank you very much. Thank you, Yamini and Vishal, for the
If you have no
opportunity.
other queries, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Yogi Reddy. That was a very insightful session because I think because this is the need of the hour because we are supposed to learn new things as well because we need to know understand before we implement. So, the really great session. Thank you so much. See you in the next session, guys.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.